dying, it's because I am. I was at work yesterday and some child coughed right in my face like 5 times. And within an hour I had a sore throat. And now I feel like death, so. That being said, I know it's been a minute since I made a video, so if you can tolerate my raspy ass voice, then here you go. So I wanted to make a video that goes a little bit more in depth about how the proofwriting process becomes increasingly complex. Because I know I said it in the past that upper level math classes become more proof heavy and proof centric as opposed to, just reciting definitions and things like that. And I've said that the proofwriting gets harder, which anyone can appreciate and believe, but I think it can be beneficial to explain how specifically it gets harder. Gotta drink my Airborns so I don't die. So if anyone has taken an intro to abstract or a bridge to abstract math course and that was their first introduction to proofs, they do extremely simple proofs. Things like if P then Q, you're given P, therefore Q. If it rains, I'm going to the store. Well, it rained, so what does that mean? It means I'm going to the store. That's as simple as proofwriting can get, or sentential logic can get. And you can make more complex sentences using if P then Q statements and contrapositives and converses and all of those types of things, but once you get the hang of that, it's just all the same, and length isn't really going to do much for you in terms of being a challenge. Or you could have something that's equally simple but for a different reason. Let me show you an example. So if my given is that cars have engines and a Honda Civic is a car, and I'm told to prove that a Honda Civic has an engine, well, that's trivial because it's obviously true. The proof for my argument is given in the given itself. Beyond that, you can be given a definition for something or a statement of fact that involves a definition, like saying, this is going to be some topological lingo, but given a homeomorphism from X to Y, two topological spaces, and X is Hausdorff, prove that Y is Hausdorff. You can draw several conclusions before you really even get anywhere. You can define what a Hausdorff space is, what that means for items inside of a Hausdorff space. You can define what a homeomorphism is and what that means for items in both sets and how they relate to each other, and all kinds of other stuff, which is basically just looking at aspects of the facts or the definitions that you're given, finding within those substantiation for the claim that you're trying to prove, which is really just a more complex version of an if P then Q, but it hinges on knowing definitions and knowing them really well. So beyond trivial things, beyond very simple, straightforward things, and beyond digging around definitions for the items that you're given to find proof and validation and substantiation for the claim you're trying to prove, proofs can get a lot more complex because at a certain point you have to create the tools that you use to prove the statement or the theorem or whatever you're working with. And I have an example here, because I know that sounds very vague, and it is. This proof is rather lengthy, one of the longer ones I've had. And granted, it could be shorter because it's not all written in set notation, which is fine. That's just the style of my professor, it's whatever. But it starts right here, comes all the way down, takes up all the back page. So we're looking at 25, 30 lines of proof, which is a lot for, unless you're a grad student and you're writing 4 or 5 plus pages of proof, this is a lot. Even in topology, the most I've had is probably 5 to 10 lines that I've written on exams. And in orange, I have highlighted things that we have created, and I'll explain that a little more thoroughly in a minute. So this theorem concerns determining whether or not a graph is Hamiltonian. A Hamiltonian graph is a graph which has a Hamiltonian cycle, and a Hamiltonian cycle is a cycle which touches every vertex exactly once. So no algorithm exists for determining whether or not a graph is Hamiltonian. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's an MP problem, which, if you're not familiar with computational complexity, it basically means that the size of the problem of a certain topic is not like linearly correlated to its complexity in solving it. Determining whether or not a relatively small graph is Hamiltonian might take a few minutes on a normal desktop computer, whatever. If we're talking about 20 vertices or less. If we're talking about 30, 50, or 100 vertices, then the difficulty in determining whether or not it's Hamiltonian becomes exponential, and then it takes literally supercomputers. And at a certain point, if you're at 100 or 200 vertices, then it's unsolvable, more or less. This is just a theorem that says if a graph meets these certain very, very specific requirements, then it's Hamiltonian. Until a polynomial time algorithm gets created, things like this are the best we have for computing stuff. I'm not going to go over every line of the proof. I'm just going to talk about the things that we created or pulled out of the proof to eventually prove it. So the first thing we did is we picked an arbitrary longest cycle in G. It doesn't matter what the name is. And we're assuming that that path is not Hamiltonian, because if we did, then it would be done, and that wouldn't cover every single case. So we have to assume that it doesn't cover every vertex in our graph. So now we have some arbitrary longest path that exists in our graph. It might be Hamiltonian, it might be not, we don't know. For complete rigor, we have to take every possible consideration. Beyond that, we said let H be a component in the graph minus that some longest cycle that must exist, but we don't know the name of it or what vertex are in it in what order. So that's two things we've created or we've pulled out of our graph. We picked the longest path that exists. The longest cycle that exists, so a closed path. So it starts and ends at the same vertex. We don't know what its name is, but we know it exists, and we're going to make some statements about it. And then we're going to make some statements about the graph that would be left over if we took that cycle out of the graph. And then the third is we're going to pick an orientation of C, and we're going to arbitrarily name from 1 to R the vertices within C, which is that longest cycle. And we're going to make some statements about that. And then the next thing we're going to create is for I from 1 to R, which is what we named the vertices in our cycle, we're going to say let DI be the vertex that follows CI on C. We're going to make some statements about that. The next thing we're going to do, let V in the vertex set of H, and H was some component in G minus our longest cycle. And we're going to create a new thing called I, which is V and all of the components. We said DI, let DI be the vertex that follows CI on C. Now we're having I being a sequence of vertices from V, then DI, all the way to DR, so that we can make a claim about I and its independence. And then lastly, we're saying U is equal to the set of vertices, a different set of vertices in our longest cycle that we arbitrarily chose in the beginning, and we're going to make a claim about that in this case, which is that it's a vertex cut set. We make a couple statements about that, and then we're pulling all of these facts together at the end, and we're using proof by contradiction. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, 6 items that exist in the graph that we had to identify arbitrarily, albeit, and pick out and make claims about them. So it's like saying, back to my car analogy, I have a car. It doesn't matter what kind of car it is, but I know that since it's a car, it must have these things: 4 wheels, an engine, a transmission, an airbag, etc. And then proceeding to make claims and statements about those features of a car, because a car by definition has those things. So you can see how it can really, really be complex, not only to try and figure out what things you have to pick out that are going to be beneficial to your proof writing, and then also keeping track of it, and also being really, really clear about what the existence of those things means for what you're trying to solve. And that's where a lot of people get tripped up. It's definitely a excuse me. It's definitely a hard thing to master. And some people are better at it than others. I seem to be okay, considering I don't put quite as much time to proofwriting as I do compared to other people, but I also put a lot more time to vocab. And graph theory is extremely vocab heavy. Hopefully that was helpful, or at the very least interesting. I'm going to try and max out this time during spring break and this weekend to make some more videos if possible, if I have some good topics that come to mind. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.